Hello and welcome. Today we'll be looking at three new modules from Nekyia Circuits. They are a 4 HP Attenuator Mixer Module, Opal, a 4 HP Super Utility Module, Mezcal, and the 8 HP Complex LFO, Obsidian. Now, all three of these work great together and are great as standalone modules, but I like personally to have attenuators with lots of CV inputs and such, so I could really dial things in. Especially Opal and Mezcal, they play really nicely together. And then your source for that is obviously Obsidian. Obsidian is a complex LFO that cross-modulates between both LFOs. It has some logic outputs and some waveform shifting, adjusting inputs and reset inputs. Obsidian can go fairly slow and get up to audio rate. Without further ado, let's get into these three modules of analog goodness. First, we'll talk about these little guys on the side real quick, and then we'll jump to Obsidian. First one on the left here is Opal. It's a 3-channel mixer or attenuator with 2 separate outputs. Each channel has 5 volts normal to it when unpatched. We have an attenuator on each channel, so we could go positive or negative 5 volts. So we could do offsetting real easy, or give manual control to certain CV inputs like we'll see in a little bit with Obsidian. You have a destination of 2 different outputs, X or I'm going to call it Y. I think that's a lambda. I don't quite remember since college. Or you could set the switch to the middle and it routes it to neither output. So it's a good way to silence it since we have attenuators here and it's really hard to get to absolute 0. And you'll notice there's this 2-time switch at the bottom here, which will not adjust the CV built in there, but it will take your audio and double that voltage. And this other little guy here on the right is Mezcal, another 4 HP, nice little utility module from Nekyia. And it is 4 plus handy little utilities. Up top here, we have a buffered mult of the input and 3 buffered outputs. In the second section here, we have wave rectification. So we have our input in the top left. And for the outputs, we have half wave rectification, full wave rectification, and an invert output. And that is just an invert of the phase of the input signal. The next section we have here is a little 3-channel mixer, which is great with using with Opal, so you can attenuate your signals before sending into the mixer. So we have inputs in the upper left, upper right, and lower left. And then we have our output in the lower right. So that's the mixer section. And then we have our comparator section here, where we have our input signal and we have our threshold signal. Here's our positive output and our negative output. So I'm going to put an LFO into the comparator and I'm going to patch output X from Opal. We have our positive output and our threshold determines the pulse width here when feeding a triangle into the input. So we're getting, starting at negative 5 volts, we're getting positive 5 volts output, or that could be 7 or 8, I'm not sure. And then we have the negative output, which we could see it's doing the invert of the positive output. And again, you can adjust the pulse width with the threshold. Let's get this into audio rate and listen to it real quick. And let's throw a second oscillator here into the threshold instead. So, interesting effect. And this is just the positive output. The negative output's going to sound the same, but it's inverted. And that is a quick look at Opal and Mezcal. Now let's take a look at Obsidian, the 8 HP complex LFO with built-in logic, real interesting CV controls, and you could even use it as a synth voice. Okay, so right now I have the LFO on the first channel of Obsidian. I'm using that alone, and we're just listening to the triangle and square wave outputs. I have the triangle wave on the left ear and the square wave on the right ear. But first, real quick, let's just listen to that triangle wave, and we could hear and even see little harmonics in the peak there, and that is just the real fun nature of Obsidian. It has nice little harmonics in it. So first we have the rate control, which can go fairly slow. Hear those little harmonics even in the LFO, which is really nice, I think. Let's hear that bottom harmonic one more time. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to turn this up. Get back to oscillator range. We can see those harmonics. And now let's look at the features of each channel of Obsidian. Now they're mirror images of each other, so they do the same thing, and they cross mod each other, which is this attenuator here and this attenuator here. So if I have an LFO going on rate 2, it can affect the pitch rate 1. In a positive or negative direction, it just flips the triangle wave. We could get into FM synthesis range. And we could cross mod both of them. So yeah, really cool LFOs. But now let's turn off that cross mod, which it doesn't quite zero out, even though there is a center detent, so it does snap at 0. It's not perfectly at 0, so when I turn this rate up, you could hear it wobble the tiniest bit. And you could see it going right there. But if I get it just right, it should stop, but it's such a precise position, and that's part of the beauty of Obsidian. So now let's check out the symmetry input here, which does different things between the square wave and the triangle. So I'm going to start with that at 0. Could already hear a little bit more harmonics because it's not exactly at 0 like this attenuator, but now it is. So let's turn this up and see what it does to the triangle wave. It starts to turn it into a saw wave, and you hear the square wave just zeroed out from having no pulse width, because it's basically doing the same thing as the comparator here. And it'll zero out in the negative direction as well. So this gives you pulse width though, with your pulse or square wave, and the symmetry input gives you opposite ramp down or ramp up. And it's not quite a ramp up or down. It clips by the time it gets to that saw. And before that, it's kind of a houndstooth shape. So it's real interesting. And we still get that jiggling right at the peak of the triangle. Now if we plug into the CV input, it should stop that wobbling. And it did. And now we can take CV from anything and use it for pitch. And I'm not quite sure, and it probably doesn't track volt per octave, but you can get some semblance of pitch control with the CV input, and you have a nice attenuator. And you could get microtonal with a drone. And of course, we have the reset input, which resets our waveform. I'm going to set the second LFO to be our reset with the pulse wave and set that into the reset of input 1. You can see it's doing really interesting things to our pulse pattern with the reset. And similarly, it's adding a spike every time we get a reset of a higher voltage than the waveform itself, similar to the symmetry, which was also giving us an additional spike in voltage up to clipping level. And you could have nice fun with hard sync, basically, is what this is. Now let's check out these logic outputs. So we have sum, which is a mix of both LFOs. And I'm going to just center this audio. And we get to choose whether it uses the pulse wave or the triangle. So you can get more interesting waveforms with your LFO. So this is a mix. And then we can get difference, which is the distance between the two waveforms. It's that difference. So it gives us a little bit different and a little bit more fun and unique waveform. And then we have min and max. Now max is going to be like an OR, except this is bipolar, but it just takes the max voltage of the signal. It's kind of like both signals are waves of water, and you're looking at it front on. Everything rides on top of that water. It rides on top of both of them, and that is your output signal of that overlaying of both waveforms. You can see we're getting that OR effect here when this first waveform gets into more positive territory. And then we have the min, which is going to give us the opposite. It rides underneath the water. So the lowest point between overlaying both LFOs gives us the min. And we again can switch between pulse or triangle. Now that in a nutshell is Obsidian, but where you could get really crazy is not only just utilizing all these outputs, but using them between each other with self-patching. I'm going to patch this triangle wave to the symmetry of the other one, and let's do some frequency modulation. And if we're patching a sequence to both inputs, we could again use this mult, and we can get those buffered copies of our full per octave type sequence. Alright, now let's look at some patches of this as an LFO. Alright, let's check out using Obsidian as an LFO modulator for a voice. So right now I have basically a square wave coming out of Skywave here, and I have the triangle out of each of the two LFOs of Obsidian going into Opal. I'm going to use the first LFO, triangle wave here, and I'm going to attenuate it to control the pulse width of that square wave. I want to attenuate it because if I go full, it zeroes out or goes to a full pulse, meaning there's no sound. So I'm going to turn this down a little until it doesn't cut out. About there. And I have the second input of the second LFO triangle wave going out into this scope here, and to control the cutoff frequency of the filter. Let's turn the resonance down a little. So I'll turn this attenuator up. So that's what we're modulating at the moment. And let's mess around with some more cross mod here. And what if instead I took, say, the difference here, or the cutoff frequency, and I use this triangle wave, and I'm going to plug it into Mezcal, and I'm going to full wave rectify it. I'm going to take this full wave rectification and put it onto the symmetry of the first oscillator. Getting that nice deep growling with the filter. So lots of really cool shapes we could get here with just CVing with itself with Mezcal. Let's patch the min into the symmetry of this one. Ooh, get some vocal throaty sounds here. It's with the resonance of the filter. Yeah, it's with square on the slower wave. It's giving us that real cool digitized sound. But it's all analog. Check out bandpass. No cross mod. So it starts to get real crazy, real easy with the cross mod. And that is Obsidian as a modulator for a voice. Now let's check out using Obsidian pulse outputs for triggers of drums here, but you could use them for triggers or gates of anything. Let's see if we can get any nice rhythmic material out of it. So right now it's just two free running LFOs. The left LFO is triggering Bacillus iteratus alter, and the right LFO is triggering Manus iteratus. So we could hear they're just independent of each other. But what if we cross-modded these? Can we get them nice and rhythmically intertwined? Kind of like we saw with the waveforms. Using just one, we could keep a steady rhythm while modulating with the other one. Let's mess around with the pitch of this one. Let's add some reverb to this. Yeah, there we go. And what if we stuck one of the triggers in one of the logics? Get a nice rhythmic beat going here. And let's cross mod this first one and let's get crazy. Men was nice. And what if we messed with the symmetry a bit? Let's attenuate that. And that is using Obsidian as interesting triggers. So now I'm going to jump back over to using Obsidian as voice and kind of flip it with this voice oscillator here and use this as the LFO. That's some of the LFO there. I'm using the Skywave here. It's kind of a slewy sample and hold going into the pitch control or frequency of the first oscillator. The second oscillator is being cross-modded from the first. And then I have symmetry control going into both the left and right oscillator, and that's just coming from an LFO being molted in Mezcal. As for the outputs, the left ear is the sum output, and the right ear going up into this scope here is the max output. And I have the output going into bib for a little bit of drive, some echo, and some verb. So let's see how this not Benjolin sounds, and it gets pretty Benjolin-y. And then it is Obsidian as a Pseudo-Benjolin, using a sample and hold style input into one of the CVs. And that's it for this video on the Nekyia Circuits 3 new modules, Opal, Mezcal, and Obsidian. I have more information on all 3 modules down below in the description. Until next time.